Whether you're a classroom teacher, a maths lead, or just someone who loves a good number story, join us each week as we explore the joys and challenges of teaching primary maths with expert interviews and practical tips. Welcome to the Primary Maths Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Primary Maths Podcast. I'm Jon Cripwell.
And I'm Becky Brown.
And this is the podcast where we talk all things primary maths, from counting on fingers to trying to convince SLT, lesson tweaks to those big curriculum conundrums.
Each week during term time, we'll bring you a relaxed but packed episode with classroom conversations, interviews with experts, and ideas you can actually use wherever you're teaching.
We'll also be sharing a resource we think is worth your time and having a bit of a chat about the maths of life, because maths is literally everywhere. Even if, just like at lunchtime today, you're trying to split a bill.
Or if you're having ongoing conversations with your teenager about why they can't have 300 Robux each day.
Yeah, that's real world problem solving right there.
So today we're kicking off with a fantastic guest, Dr Heidi Kirkland, to talk about maths anxiety, a little bit about teaching abroad, and how what we believe about ourselves shapes the way we teach.
So, before we jump into the interview, let's have a little bit of a chat about the maths of life, because this is the part of the show where we can talk about those everyday moments where maths just turns up, whether we like it or not.
What's been on your mind this week regarding maths then, Jon?
Well, everything, Becky, because I spend my life thinking solely about maths. I spent the morning in a lovely school this morning in rural Derbyshire, and it just got me thinking that maths is literally everywhere. We were talking about EYFS provision and how you can set up your, enhanced provision in early years, but the real skill for the teachers and the TAs and the adults working in the room is to sort of identify those moments in that are happening just by the provision being there, just by the children playing. The skill for the teacher is identifying those moments and trying to find those little bits of maths that just naturally occur.
Yeah, I think if you start looking for maths, you do actually find it literally everywhere. I think thinking about the podcast and what we were going to include and talking about maths, I've been looking for it everywhere, probably more so than normally. And it really is all around us, isn't it? So it's going to be easy to find something to talk about each week regarding maths, I think. Yeah,
I think, I used to say quite happily that I didn't do maths, but you can't really go through the day without doing a bit of maths, can you? For instance, this week we've been looking at holidays because my two children, I've got a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old, they have been abroad, Anglesey, but also we did get over to Euro Disney last year, but we went on the train and Eurostar, which was brilliant, but they haven't flown yet. So this year we said we're definitely going to go abroad, and we're looking at holidays abroad and things. I think we're going to go to Centre Parks, because even though I've got a Centre Parks just down the road, literally 15 miles down the road, it was cheaper to go to one in the Netherlands, obviously. Yes. It's about half the price in the school holidays. And we get to fly there. And also, there's culture and stuff for the kids. You go on the website and it's all in Dutch, which isn't helpful for me, but I did manage to find the button that translates it. And then you get the prices and they're in euros. So I found myself trying to work out roughly how many euros are there to pounds. And that moment where something's 100 euros and you're trying to figure out if it's a bargain or a bit of a rip-off, and you stood there trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Whether you're going to spend the time working out a complicated conversion or whether you end up just thinking, yeah, okay, I'm just going to tap my card and hope for the best.
Yeah, worry about it later. That's the classic thing, isn't it? If you're on holiday, you don't want to be doing maths. But I'm not on holiday yet, and I love doing a bit of maths. So I was trying to figure out how much the holiday was going to cost me and whether it really was cheaper than staying in the UK. And obviously, I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but reflecting back on it, I was doing a lot of mental maths. But I wasn't necessarily trying to be 100% accurate, Becky. I was trying to just get a general sense of roughly how much it was. Maths is about being accurate most of the time.
Yeah, some of the time. Yeah, I think we do get a bit caught up on that, don't we, when we're teaching maths, that it has to be accurate and you have to be right. But when you look at maths of life, often we're not going for an accurate answer and we just want a ballpark, good estimation.
Yeah, a good estimation, a good approximation. It's one of those things, isn't it? We teach how to estimate something or how to get an approximate answer, but how often do the children actually use that? You know, we say to them, you can use this to work out whether your calculation's right or wrong, but 9 times out of 10 they just want to do the calculation and then move on. But I think you're right. I think in life, actually, approximations are what we use all the time. So, at the time of recording, €1 is about 84p. So I did a little bit of rounding, not too much, but basically 85p is what I left it as. So essentially, you're trying to find 85% of the cost of the holiday to the Netherlands, which was fine. You know, I love my percentages. I love a fraction as well. Who doesn't? And I know that 85% is 17/20ths. And, you know, we can all do 17/20ths. Becky, that's a nice straightforward calculation.
John, that is a very maths teacher calculation to just try to do mentally. Yeah, just divide by 20, multiply by 17, we'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Or divide by 20, find 3 of those, and take that off. You could find the 3/20ths and subtract it. I'm all about the fluency and flexibility when it comes to these sorts of things. But
Absolutely.
actually, I'll be honest. What I really did was sort of work out 15% and then knock it off. And I'll be honest, I didn't even do that. I worked out 10% and then just took off a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's what I'd have done. Gone for 10 and worked from there.
Yeah, it's not going to get me, you know, I wouldn't expect Chen to do that in his SATs papers, but it's not going to get me the mark there. But in the real world, that's kind of what we do, isn't it? And so when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about actually this is all about proportionality. It's having that internal sense of how large 85% of something is. So I'm not actually working out, it's that sort of blurry line between mental maths and vibes-based maths. You know, and in my day-to-day life, not when I'm teaching, but in my day-to-day life, I'm very much about the vibes-based maths. And I'll be honest, the maths gets a bit more in my favour depending on how much I want the thing that I'm trying to spend the money on. And I really did want to go abroad. So for those who are interested, a midweek in the one of the Netherlands centre parks is €929, which is about £750, and that is about a third of the price of going to a UK centre parks in the October half term. So yeah,
There's some
worth
more
looking at.
there, John.
There is.
Some more there.
There
got
is.
3 days.
Yeah. The other bit of maths I've got to work out next is the budget airlines. You know, the price that it starts off at when you're trying to book the flights, and then how much you actually pay, and the proportion. I'm going to reckon it's probably going to be about 200% more than the initial price. But, you know, we'll see. I'll let you know next week, maybe. So, Becky, anything that's been on your mind maths-wise this week?
Yeah, well, actually, it's funny you should say that you weren't going to do maths on holiday, because I've got another holiday-related maths story, but this was on holiday, and my poor children, who do have 2 maths teacher parents.
They cannot get away from it. Yeah.
They really can't. We went to, not quite abroad. Well, it depends how you look at it. We went to the Isle of Wight for a week.
Well, I would say that's off the mainland. I think you are, you know, it may not be tropical, but it is southern. You know, you're going south, aren't you? And it's not on the mainland.
It counts. It's got a lovely microclimate. It's, you know, pretty much the same thing. And I would say it's cheaper, but actually prices of ferries are a bit scary, so not necessarily. But yes, it is lovely over on the Isle of Wight, and we were very excited in the ferry, waiting for the ferry, had a couple of delays, and we were very much thinking for our holiday, we'll start zooming to go on. We will put the devices away. My boys are both 12 and 14, so very much device based lots of the time. So we put them away and we thought we'd actually have a conversation with each other. And I happened to have one of those, you know, brochures you get when you get on the ferry, showing me all the wonderful things I could get up to when I got onto my holiday on the Isle of Wight. And the very first paragraph gave us the dimensions of the Isle of Wight.
Of course it did. Of course it did.
to west. Everybody wants to know that. It's the first thing you want to know.
Normally they tell you, don't they, in football fields and things, but you had the actual dimensions of
Actual
the Isle of Wight.
dimensions. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're familiar with the Isle of Wight, but it is colloquially known as the diamond. It is roughly the shape of a rhombus. I mean, very roughly. But
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily use this in a maths lesson as a representation of a rhombus. But yeah,
Maybe
okay,
not
we'll go with it. We'll go with
yeah,
it.
a non-example of a rhombus, but close enough for an approximation, which is what we were
More
going.
vibes-based maths. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we decided, well, I say we decided, I don't know who it was that actually decided, but that we would think about what the distance would be all the way around the Isle of Wight if we were to drive.
It was definitely you, wasn't it, Becky? It was definitely you that decided this. Don't try and fob it off on one of the kids. Neither of the kids said, shall we work out the perimeter of the Isle of Wight? That'd be a fun thing to do, Mum, while we're waiting in the car.
Yeah, no, you're right. It was. I mean, it may have been my husband, but it definitely wasn't one of the boys. So yeah, we didn't want an exact. Obviously, for us, it didn't matter. We weren't paying money out. It wasn't something where we were buying lengths of skirting board or anything that it mattered. But it was just a bit of, well, I say fun for us, fun. Trying to do a rough approximation of what the perimeter would be of the Isle of Wight. And then we started, the conversation started about whether you would drive on the beach or how close you could get to the cliff edge. And, it passed the time while we were in the ferry queue. So it did its job in the end. And we spoke to each other. We had a conversation.
I think that's a real nice bit of real world inquiry, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And we could have, with a maths teacher head on, I could have started with the what ifs.
Yeah. Yeah. But what you did was you noticed something and then you asked a question about it. And that is, to me, essentially what maths really is.
Yeah, you're right. It was a good conversation starter and it kept us busy talking about one of our favourite things.
I'll tell you what, after this, Becky, me and you, we're going to be invited to all the dinner parties. Just,
Absolutely.
People are going to be bowled over by the incredible conversation starters, Euros and the perimeter of the Isle of Wight. But that this is real life maths. This is where we find maths out in the wild.
Each week we're going to bring you an interview with someone who has something interesting to say about maths teaching in general, leadership, any area of maths or teaching really.
That's right. And this week we are going to start with an interview that I did with Dr Heidi Kirkland. She's the co-author of a really great book all about maths anxiety. My guest today is an international primary educator and maths specialist whose work is helping to reshape how we understand and respond to maths anxiety. She's one of the co-authors of Maths Anxiety, Solving the Equation, a powerful and practical and highly recommended guide for anyone looking to build maths confidence in children and themselves. She works with the universities to support trainee teachers and master's students, and she's the founder of Mindful Maths, a platform offering resources, training and guidance to help learners and educators develop a more positive relationship with maths. Through her writing, teaching and training, she's helping to shift the conversation around maths learning. My guest today is Dr Heidi Kirkland, and I'm delighted to have her on the show. Welcome, Heidi.
Hi, thank you so much.
So I'd like to start with just finding out a little bit about your experiences of maths at school. Did you enjoy maths? Was it a good subject for you?
Well, personally, I found it, as I was younger, I found it quite easy. It came quite naturally to me. And one of the things I remember most is my year 3 teacher. And he was called Mr. Webster, and he was so positive. And everything I did, he excited me about maths. It was a challenge. He always gave me tricky questions, and it was enjoyable. And I never really had to, not stretch myself, but I never, I didn't have any negative experiences. And then I remember the following year, with a change of teacher going into year 4, that it was quite a different experience for me. And it was only really as an adult reflecting on that. For example, I remember vividly one lesson. It was written multiplication strategies, and I was getting all of the hard ones correct, but I was doing something wrong. I can't remember what I was doing wrong, but I was doing something wrong in the procedure that meant I was getting all the easy ones right. And that was, that was publicly kind of shared, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I always remember that situation. I remember feeling embarrassed and like I'd copied someone because I've got the hard ones right, but the easy ones wrong. And my confidence was really knocked from then. And I just didn't really enjoy maths. Like I was still okay at it, but I never really put myself out there, I think. So that's really kind of like my early experience of maths. And then going to secondary school, I was in like top sets. Like the school I went to was streamed, so I was in the top sets. But even that wasn't enjoyable because when I asked questions, all the children that found it easier than me kind of ridiculed me in a way as well. So I also remember that experience of being commented on like by my peers and classmates. So I actually I asked to move down to set 2 because I wasn't enjoying it, and I was fine. Like I did well in my GCSEs, but I stopped straight away. And it wasn't really until I did my teacher training that I actually got involved in maths again, and really started to unpick my own experiences. So yeah, I think in a way, although I found maths quite straightforward, it wasn't enjoyable.
That's really interesting, and listeners might know my own experiences. I didn't particularly enjoy maths at school, but absolutely loved teaching it and really found a love for it as an adult and as a teacher. And it sounds a little bit like although you found maths itself not too difficult to do, the actual the subject wasn't something that you loved, not something that you were passionate about, and yet you are now, as we'll come to in a moment, sort of leading a maths department and writing about maths, and maths is very much something you're passionate about, I'm guessing.
Definitely.
Just want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier in the story, that your experience in year 3, you said that you enjoyed those lessons and you found them fun, even though they were difficult and challenging. Is that right?
Well, what I enjoyed was the conversation about it. And really now, from being a teacher, I think it was completely the teacher's language and how he framed the questions and everything. I mean, it wasn't that it was a difficult thing, but it was a harder question or a harder task. And it was that want to keep going and want to kind of apply it. So personally for me, I think that's kind of the foundation of my belief in maths teaching, that teachers have such an important role, and how like the language, their behaviour and everything has such a big impact.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And it's interesting because I was talking to another guest recently about should maths lessons be fun? And his take on it was that we can make maths lessons fun by making them challenging, but making them engaging as well. And it's the teacher's role to be enthusiastic about it and to sort of, bring the class along with them. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing now, Heidi. Whereabouts in the world are you? Because we have met over the internet, because it wouldn't really, I don't think expenses would have covered travel arrangements, to be honest.
So currently I am living in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I've been here for 5 years and I'm teaching at an international school over here. So I am a primary school teacher. I'm currently teaching year 6. And I am also lucky to have the role of whole school maths lead within the primary school as well, which I really, really enjoy looking at maths through that lens. But as well as that, I work with some UK universities, also online. And also I've founded the company Mindful Maths, which, as you said, it's an online platform that really, really focuses on believing in every pupil, every person, that everyone's capable. We just need the right support in place.
Absolutely, and we'll come back and touch on that a little bit more later, if that's okay. So how did you end up in Kuala Lumpur then? We were talking just before we started recording, and I admitted I had a vague idea. I thought it was in Malaysia, but I had to look on Google and check where Kuala Lumpur was. So did you always want to teach abroad, or how did you end up in Kuala Lumpur?
Well, really, so after I did my PGC in the UK, and I moved straight away to Egypt. I wanted to work internationally. I wanted to experience different culture. I wanted to experience travel. And I was 22 at the time. So I taught out there for 3 years, and then I came back to the UK, where I taught in a state school and also an independent school as well. And I just wanted, again, to experience the world and meet lots of different people, experience new things, new cultures. And Malaysia's a great place for that.
So, just get back to maths for a moment. You're a co-author, along with Dr. Thomas Hunt, on a brilliant book, Maths Anxiety, Solving the Equation. I haven't quite finished reading it yet, I'll admit, but I'm 2/3 of the way through. It's a really accessible, I won't say easy read, but I mean that in the best possible way, in that, although it's all research based and backed up by evidence, it doesn't feel like a heavy textbook. It's accessible, and there's lots of practical examples and lots of personal reflections in there as well from lots of different people. So what prompted you to focus on maths anxiety in the first place? How did that come to be your specialism?
Well, really, so I did my PGCE with a specialism in maths. And following that, I went on to do my master's whilst I started teaching. And in my second year of master's, when I was asked to do like a dissertation on something that I really wanted to do at the same...
Sorry, Heidi, was this while you were in Egypt?
So I was doing... it was a university online from the UK. So I finished my PGCE at the University of Derby. And then I carried on, it was University of Derby online, to do my master's in education. So I carried that on as I moved, because I really like research. I love exploring and finding things out. So I knew I wanted to carry on and do my master's, and it was great that Derby had that platform to do it online, so I could still go to Egypt. So when I was doing that, at the same time, I was teaching a child who was just a completely different person in a maths lesson, and it was really striking. And to this day, I still haven't really experienced that striking contrast with another pupil. So this pupil was really, really outgoing, confident, and then in maths they just shrunk into themselves and just didn't want to be there, didn't want any of the maths around him to be happening. And I think I tried to look at what, my teacher training, what did that tell me to do? My enthusiasm wasn't working, all the support, all of the focus on the attainment wasn't working. What could I do? And I was researching around it, because there was actually nothing in my teacher training to help me with it. And then that led me to maths anxiety, and I just got really, really interested in it. I wanted to help. And I think that's really led to my belief of it doesn't matter who the person is, anyone can experience maths anxiety. And personally, for me, I wouldn't say it was a condition that someone has or like a label. It's an experience. It fluctuates, and it can be really, really strong in one situation and not in another. And I think that was really what underpinned my desire to start looking into it. So I did that for my master's project. And again, that related to the role of my research, related to the role of the teacher and the teacher's behaviour using reinforcement in maths lessons. And then I hadn't had enough, so I then went to do my PhD, and that focused on maths anxiety as well. And it was kind of like the whole experience. So I was looking at case studies of 3 children who experienced maths anxiety, and they were all quite different in their experiences. So along the way, I met people like Dr. Thomas Hunt, for example, and Shirley Conran, and just I really enjoyed opening up the conversation about maths anxiety. And I think now, compared to when I started my research, which was 10, 11 years ago, I think like media coverage, for example, is a lot bigger. There's books now that are available. Myself and Tom's.
There's certainly one very good book I'm aware of, yeah. I agree. So I did my PGCE at Derby as well.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. So I credit somebody that we talked about offline, actually, Dave Benson, was one of the lecturers on the PGCE at Derby.
Yeah.
And he had a huge influence in me in terms of my own confidence in maths, because maths was the area that I thought that I was going to enjoy least in teaching. Ironically, turned out to be the thing that I ended up specialising in. But I think perhaps because I could empathise a little bit with the children in terms of those misconceptions. But
Yeah.
certainly maths anxiety was not something that I ever labelled myself with, or I ever heard discussed on my PGCE, or definitely not in schools when I was on my placements. And I would say it's probably only in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe, that those two words have been put together in a sentence that I've heard. So is this a new thing? And why are we talking about it now, do you think?
It's definitely not a new thing. I mean, I think from like the 50s, like research was going into it. It was called number anxiety, and really the focus then was more on gender. So why is there a gender gap and things like that? And today, the research, like there's one, for example, like University of Cambridge, a few years ago, it was about one third of 15 to 16-year-olds had moderate to high levels of maths anxiety. The
Wow.
prevalence is massive, and there's a really
sorry, Heidi, is that comparable to any other subjects? Is there English anxiety, for example?
So there is research about like literacy anxiety, and there's also like foreign language anxiety. So there are specific subject anxieties, which, as I was researching maths anxiety, there are similarities, but obviously it's the trigger, it's the maths itself which is causing the reaction. And if you look at the actual definition of the DSM definition of a phobia, it's actually the exact same as maths anxiety, but it's not a physical thing. Like the numbers aren't going to come up and bite you from the paper, but like it is creating that response for someone. So I genuinely believe that whilst I don't label someone saying like you have maths anxiety, you can be maths anxious in any situation involving maths. And it can be quite extreme, or it can be quite mild, where you just generally like your heart's just a little bit quicker, or you don't want to be involved. And it could just be like something specific about maths, or it could be every time that you're using it in a social setting. There's so many different variations to it.
Now, I know there's a whole chapter on this that doesn't have a definitive conclusion, but just for the listeners, what is maths anxiety then? Is it a thing? Is it just being, struggling with maths? Is that what it is? Or is it something different?
So I think it was back in 2016, maybe. My first article that I'd ever written, any published work, was called "Isn't It Just a Dislike for Learning Maths?" And essentially what I was doing for part of my research was asking my colleagues, like, have you heard of maths anxiety? What do you think it is? And essentially people thought or believed that it's just someone not liking maths, someone not want to do it, or someone finding it really, really tricky. But through my research of maths anxiety, through helping people with experience of maths anxiety, I think the more important thing than someone finding maths difficult leading to like maths anxiety is their self-belief, because you can still be a very, very capable mathematician and still experience maths anxiety. There's like research from the OECD with the PISA results, for example, and even high performing countries still have high levels of maths anxiety and negative emotions.
That's really interesting. So I was going to ask you about that, whether it's a cultural thing, because we talk a lot about the culture of maths, particularly in the UK, and how when we're shaping our pedagogy, we've looked to other areas of the world and things, Shanghai, famously, Singapore. And so I was wondering, do people in those territories, do they still have maths anxiety? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, it's actually surprisingly high when you look at the data. But like you said, like it can be about cultural expectations, pressure to perform, whether that's from parents, peers, school, or whether it's placed on someone themselves. So that pressure can also create these feelings of anxiety during maths situations. So it's not that someone is unable to solve a question. That can be one person's experience for sure, and it is quite a common relationship between finding maths difficult and being maths anxious. But
yeah, you can imagine one might lead to the other in that sort of situation. But why might somebody be anxious about maths if they don't find maths difficult?
So I think one of the main drivers is self-belief, and no matter it's how that person perceives themselves. So for example, in my situation when I was in secondary school, every time I asked a question to seek for help, I was kind of ridiculed or mocked, and it just made me believe like, oh well, I'm not really as good as these other people. Like it's a lot of comparison, and it does affect your self-belief. So even though I was getting high marks on an assessment, I still compared myself to others, and I still didn't have that belief. And similarly, in like high performing countries, for example, there's always that pressure to do better, and it's really the cultural expectations surrounding that. And even like, for example, that can be different countries, but that could also be in a family unit as well. For example, if there's an older sibling who's performing really, really well in maths, and if that was like my older brother or sister and I was doing fine, there's still that comparison, and that will also impact self-belief. So personally, one of the main messages that I've tried to get across within the book and within everything that I do talk about maths anxiety is that self-belief underpins everything. Whether, it's ability, because if someone does find it difficult as well as having that lack of self-belief, again, that can generate those feelings.
The stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, because you must have had it at parents' evenings and on the school gates and things, talking to parents. There'll be a lot of parents who will say, oh, I'm no good at maths, I can't do maths. Mum does the maths with him, or dad does the maths with him, or So is there what you're suggesting is that there's a link between that sort of story that you tell yourself about yourself and how you feel about approaching a maths problem or having to do some maths?
Definitely. And one of the things that we do talk about in the book is that other people's behaviour, other people's language affect you. It affects your experience of maths. For example, if a parent is saying, I'm not good at maths, or, they've got my maths brain, like they're not good like me, for example. And I think a lot of teachers will resonate with those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I wish you hadn't have said that, because that's really solidifying that child's lack of self-belief. And it's not a purposeful thing by parents, but it's just that's the language that they've grown up with, and that's really the knock-on effect. And I think one of the important things is to educate teachers in the importance of language, but also parents and children as well, and really solidifying the impact that a growth mindset can have. And just the language framing that that should be a universal language.
But we hear these things from parents, and that might be understandable. But in my experience, and speaking from somebody who spent a lot of time in Year 6 as well, as you are, I've heard it quite a lot in schools as well. I couldn't teach in Year 6. These are from highly experienced, excellent teachers. I couldn't teach in Year 6 because, the maths is difficult. I can understand that as somebody who was a little bit reticent about teaching in Year 6 because of the maths. So it's prevalent not just in children and in parents, but in staff in schools as well. Definitely.
So one of the distinctions that we do draw upon in the book is teachers that are experiencing maths anxiety themselves, which therefore impacts themselves and the teaching of maths, or a teacher who has teaching maths anxiety, who experiences that. So are they anxious about the content and, getting involved with it, or are they anxious about the actual teaching of it? And there can be a distinction drawn, and there is some emerging research into that. And whichever primary school you're in, there are definitely teachers and teaching assistants that that, you know, have that lack of self-belief. And again, that's coming up, that's the theme. And if you really speak to them, one of the main things is that they've not done the maths in a while. They've done their PGC, for example, and they might have had to do an assessment or a test to pass it, or you know, have a certain GCSE, but then they've not used it. And you know, even teachers who have come into year 6 from maybe like year 4, even though it's just a 2-year difference, they've become really not. I wouldn't say that they're anxious about it in you know, but it's very hesitant. I would use the word hesitant. Because it's something new to them. And again, it's that societal belief that it's now hard. Yeah. But if you unpick it, it's got all the same conceptual understandings that underpin it through primary, and it's building upon that. And that's really where, you know, schools can help, you know, give them the time to engage with the content, because time is given for planning and preparation, but it's not time on actually helping the content, helping understand the content. And I remember, for example, when I taught in the UK, teaching French, and like in my head, even though, you know, I don't have a degree, like, you know, a basic understanding of French, but I had to teach myself that. And that's really, if someone's coming from year 2 or even year 5, they're learning new curriculum content. To year 6, for example, introduction of proportion, ratio, algebra. And if they've not done that,
I would argue it goes the other way as well. I was terrified of early years for many years, because I didn't know how to teach those early concepts. As somebody who spent a lot of time, exactly. Yeah. And it's a real skill. I think we need to recognise that as well. It's not just that the year 6 maths is hard. I think maths is potentially hard wherever you're teaching it, in terms of helping children to understand those fundamental concepts. That is a difficult task, and not just in maths, I suppose, in whatever you're teaching. How can teachers recognise when a child might be suffering or living with maths anxiety?
So one of the main things that I would suggest teachers to kind of not look out for, I think that's possibly the wrong terminology, but if a child in the classroom is really not participating, and it might be across all subjects, but if it is particularly in maths, whether, you know, they might even avoid eye contact, like behavioural things like that, not put the hand up, really avoid the situation, go to the toilet
Try and
a lot,
disappear in the lesson. I think we can all recognise
physically
those children
avoid,
who just shrink a little bit in the seat.
And it's even like smaller behaviours, just like really fiddling, just trying to avert their attention to something else that's not the maths. And you know, that might be that it's avoidance on many different levels, which I think is one of the main things that you could easily observe. But one of the things, again, is the lack of self-belief. So how are they talking about themselves, and how are they talking about the maths that's happening? Are they working well with others? Because if they're quite reliant on other people, that could, you know, suggest that they're not valuing the maths, or they don't want, again, linking to avoidance, not wanting to be a part of it, and just have the general lack of motivation within that subject. And it's not specific to maths tests or time situations. It might heighten it, and there are a lot of overlaps within the constructs of maths anxiety and test anxiety, but test anxiety isn't specific to maths. It can be in any test. Yeah. But what I would say is not to have a preconception. I think that's the biggest barrier currently to identifying maths anxiety, is if, for example, someone has, you know, is getting good assessment results, you know, good attainment, I don't have to worry about them. It can really affect them, you know. It can either affect them academically later on down the line, or it can be affecting them emotionally at the moment, and really understanding the family dynamic, which I do believe is easier in primary. As you know, you teach them a lot of different things, you know, you spend a lot of your day with them compared to a secondary teacher. And again, you've got that comparison between subjects if you're a primary teacher. But there's work that's been done and research as young as 4 years old, so that children, not necessarily like classified as, you know, this is a heightened anxiety response, but it's you know, a negative reaction to maths, which can really underpin and snowball as someone goes through education.
As a teacher in the classroom, then, how can I build a culture in my classroom that might be especially supportive to because I think this is another one of those things actually that would benefit everybody. It's one of those things that we can do that we might be thinking about specific children, but actually might have a benefit for everybody. So how can we build a culture in our classrooms that is inclusive of adults and children who might have an anxiety about maths?
I think that, there's, in my classroom, for example, there are a few things that, for listeners, they can take away immediately and implement them, and some things that really have to be built on to create a classroom culture. One of the things that I really focus on is having a growth mindset and the language that's used. I know some teachers, for example, might say, if we're teaching fractions, for example, it's quite a natural thing to say, oh, this is really tricky, but we're going to get it. But even that tiny comment, it really cements those thoughts that they might have from their parents or their brothers and sisters or their friends. So it's really being conscious about the language and focusing on the positives that you can get from mistakes, really thinking that, everyone can achieve this, and it's not just that this tricky question is reserved for this child. It's that maths is an ongoing journey. It's not that at the end of every lesson we're done and then maths freezes in time until the same time tomorrow and then we start it again. It's really a process, and it underpins a lot of things. So it's really, number one, getting the growth mindset conversation going, and really, if someone's saying something in a fixed mindset manner, for example, I can't do this, I'm not able to do this, I don't have a maths brain, anything like that, just picking up on it and, making it a more positive thing and helping them reframe that. So a bit of cognitive restructuring, and just generating that conversation in the classroom. I think the second thing that I would also focus on is, what do you prioritise within your class and what do you celebrate? So if you ask a question, someone's bam, really quick, you're really celebrating speed, rather than the journey or the conceptual understanding. And that can also create anxiety in a child that's like, I've literally just written the number 9 and this child's already solved a short division question. Yeah. How is it? So even those tiny things, so just being aware of the impact that your language, even if it's celebration, if it's reinforcement, if it's about how we learn, all these things can have a huge impact on learners, and it creates that classroom culture. So I think really one of the main things in my classroom is, if someone answers a question, I'll ask them how or why is that true, or what's the connection with this? So just really getting them to slow down. And you can also really challenge learners that way as well, whilst giving other children a chance to complete that first initial question. I think, the classroom culture where curiosity is safe, success is different for everybody. Success is really diverse, and it's just acknowledging and validating everyone's experience within that.
Do you think that idea of thinking time and actually allowing some time, in terms of not just rewarding speed, but not expecting hands up immediately? That was something I introduced in the last couple of years of my teaching in the classroom, really, was I'm going to ask a question, but I don't want anybody to put their hands up yet. And then in 5 or 10 seconds, I might ask for hands up, or I might ask you to show me on the whiteboard or something. But actually building in some time to think, I think it could be really important.
Yeah, definitely. And also having, for example, a hedging question where there's multiple options that everyone can get involved with, or a goal-free problem that everyone can access, and get that level of confidence. And, that success is different for everyone. And it is, but everyone can be successful. So
alongside your work on maths anxiety, the book, the school, the teaching, the leading maths across the school, and working with ITT providers, you're also working on your platform, Mindful Maths. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, really, what I wanted to do was create a platform that could be accessed by everyone. whether it's teachers, whether it's parents, whether it's, adults that feel maths anxious themselves, just to help support an understanding, firstly, of maths anxiety, but also not just specifically maths anxiety, kind of supporting developing positive relationships with maths. And when I was doing my teacher training, that wasn't accessible. And even now, I still don't feel that there is sufficient resources available and support to help people, because the main thing for me is if we support learners develop that relationship with maths and feel more positive, it's going to have such positive an impact, rather than just focusing on the procedures of maths and being successful on paper. So really, that's kind of what inspired it.
No, that's great, and I totally agree. I think, as you mentioned before, so many people have barriers to their own belief about their ability in maths, and I think anything where they could turn to for some help and support with just what to do with those things is great. Aside from the alliteration, I love a bit of alliteration, but aside from the alliteration, why mindful maths in particular? Where did the mindful bit come from?
So really, the mindful part of it is that maths itself can be an enjoyable experience, and it can be quite calming. And, when you're making connections, when you find the answer, it can be really like a reflective state, and it's a little bit like, dominoes, and everything just runs into place. So really, that's what was behind it. And it was about educating people about, the cognition involved. I mean, we have like information guides, we have downloadable resources, online events, we support like consultancy, CPD, we do lots of that. And something that I'm currently working on, which I'm really excited about, is online courses. So at the minute, I'm developing online courses for educators, including teaching assistants as well, which supports how to support maths anxious learners, for example, and helping them overcome it, but also how to develop confidence in the classroom, how to develop confidence in teaching. So all of this exciting things are coming, which is going to be live on the website. So that's really exciting for me.
That's really good, and I'll make sure that I put a link to that website in the show notes as well. So time is flying. I could honestly spend all day talking to you about this stuff, Heidi, but we'll wrap it up there, and maybe we'll pick it up again in the future, because I know there's lots more that we could talk about. But we like to end with some quick fire questions. So,
yep.
Other than your own, is there a blog or a book or a podcast or something that you think every educator should check out?
Of research. So mine would be a book. Visible Learning for Mathematics by Jon Cripwell, Douglas Fisher and Nancy Frey. I think that's really, really good. It's got practical strategies, and it really focuses on impactful learning.
Yep, I would totally agree and endorse that choice as well. Secondly, one thing that you've changed your mind about in education?
I think from the time I did my teacher training to now, it'll be the role of the teacher. So rather than leading from the front and teaching from the front, really, I see the value of stepping back, letting children discover and explore, and really facilitating their learning that way, rather than focusing, on providing the information.
I heard somebody describe it as being, rather than being at the front of the classroom, being amongst the desks. The other day, and I thought that's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah, your job isn't to stand at the front and lecture; it's to get in amongst it. Okay, what's your favourite number and why? Assuming you have one. If not, it could just be a number that you like.
5, just because me and my son are born in May.
Oh, nice, very nice. Yeah. So happy birthday recently then. And finally, one small thing that makes a big difference in the classroom.
I would say understanding your language and the impact of it, even the power of saying nothing at all.
Fantastic. Yeah, totally agree. So if listeners, viewers would like to find out more about you and your work, where's the best place to go to connect?
You can find me and Mindful Maths both on LinkedIn or the website www.mindfulmaths.org.
Fantastic. And once again, thank you so much, Heidi. I know you've been at work today. I'm recording this at what was 8:30 in the morning here in the UK. You've done a day's work already. So thank you so much for coming back and spending this time with us. And hopefully we'll catch up again in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you once again to Dr Heidi Kirkland there for telling us all about maths anxiety, which, to be honest, Becky, wasn't something I knew a huge amount about until relatively recently, actually. I read Heidi's book, and I'm going to speak to her co-author as well, Dr Tom Hunt, as well soon, about maths anxiety. But I don't think it's something that I was particularly aware of as a teacher, to be honest. I knew some children, obviously, didn't like maths. I knew some adults didn't like maths. But in terms of maths anxiety, was that something that you'd come across before?
I think probably later in my career, more recently so, yes. I think it's something that people are talking about a lot more. I think anxiety in general is more talked about now, isn't it? Certainly, same as you, come across a lot of children who maybe had a little bit of maths anxiety. In my last year, just before I left the classroom, I did teach a child with dyscalculia, and I think there are lots of links there. The biggest thing for me, for both of those really, is that there's no correlation between the anxiety you might have for something and your ability to do it. I mean, I think it'd be very interesting, wouldn't it, to find out in other areas whether there's people who are really proficient at something but actually have a big anxiety around it. And I think that's really important, because you do tend to think, oh, well, if children struggle with something, they might have anxiety around it. It's harder to pick it apart when maybe they don't struggle, and it might be harder to even see it in those cases, but actually there is a lot of anxiety going on under the surface.
I mean, I can completely empathise with that, because I am a fantastic singer, but I'm way too anxious to do it. And the world will never know, Becky, because, I have to keep that firmly under a bushel, unfortunately. But no, you're right, though. It is interesting. And I think that idea that, as you say, it isn't linked necessarily to your attainment in a subject. And Heidi's own experience, really, of really loving maths in early key stage 2, but sort of losing that passion for the subject and feeling nervous and anxious about it. I think probably a lot of people could relate to that.
Yeah, I think more people than you realise when you start listening and thinking about it and thinking about people that you sort of work with or know. I think probably it's bigger than we realise. It's great that we're talking about it more and thinking about how we as educators can support with it. I mean, one of the biggest things for me was at the very beginning of your interview, where Heidi was talking about particular experiences, and it brought it back to me. I think I knew it already, but it's such a privilege to be teaching these young people, but you can make a real difference without even knowing it. And you want to be remembered for the right reasons. As a primary teacher, you're never going to be the expert at everything, but the way you behave and the way you interact is so important, isn't it? And those messages you send.
And even doing things with the best of intentions, right? I remember a few years ago in class, I say a few years ago, we're probably talking about 15 years ago, but, a few years ago. It's that whole approximation thing again. A few years ago in class, playing a game where it was, we were practicing our times tables, and it was, you may have seen it before, everybody sat in a circle in some chairs, and somebody stands up, and the teachers stood in the middle or stood to the side, and one of the children stood behind a child sat in the chair. So all the children sat in a circle in chairs, one child stood up behind. Teacher asked them a multiplication question. Whichever one of the two children, either the one standing up or the one sitting down in front of them, gets the answer correct, they then become the person stood outside, and it moves on to the next person. And that was just a fun game that we got to practice times tables. Except if you take a step back, actually, if you're not very good at your times tables, or you're anxious, or you're just not that quick, you get one question wrong and then you are out of that game and not practicing your times tables. Whereas if you're really proficient and very quick at it, you get to practice even more, and have your ego boosted a little bit. But if you're feeling anxious about it, then that's really not a great game for you, is it? And I can imagine putting myself in the children's position. It's coming round towards your turn and you've got to get this question right and everybody's watching you. Just those situations, if we can be a bit more aware of them, perhaps as educators, as you say, you have an opportunity really to make children's lives a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's the awareness. It's just being aware of it and try. I mean, we're never going to get it completely right for everybody all of the time, but being a bit more aware of the anxiety that could be in the room is probably going to be a step in the right direction.
Yeah. I know another thing I was probably a little bit guilty of as a teacher was using questions, yes, to check understanding, but also to check or address behaviour. If I felt somebody wasn't listening in my maths lesson, then they might be the person who got the question. But again, just reflecting on it, do they appear to be not listening or fidgeting or not engaging in the lesson, not because they're behaving poorly or not because they want to behave poorly, but just because they're trying to, avoid the lesson, avoid the maths a little bit. Not because my teaching wasn't amazing, obviously, but just obviously, but because perhaps they did have some element of maths anxiety. I also thought it was interesting, Becky, that Heidi didn't give us a sort of a definitive diagnosis of what maths anxiety is. It does seem to be a bit more intangible, doesn't it, or a bit more fluid, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that also comes with building those relationships, is you start maybe to notice with people you're familiar with what that anxiety might look like. Because I think, if you think about people you're close with in your family, I would know when they're anxious about something because I know them so well, and there's tells everywhere, or they might frown at me or something. But with a class of children, sometimes that's harder to know and harder to learn, and it's knowing what those signs are and knowing that they might actually be quite different. If you're in a room full of adults asking them to do an exercise, you might be able to tell maybe a bit more easily whether they were anxious or maybe not. Because actually one of the other interesting things was Heidi talking about how we're not just talking about maths anxiety in pupils, but also in teachers and other adults in the classroom as well.
Yeah, I mean, as a maths lead for 15 years, I definitely, and teaching in year 6 for quite a few of those years as well, you often have those conversations with staff, I wouldn't want to teach in year 6. Why not? Is it the behaviour or it's the maths? Maths, I think, over the years has been the number one reason that people didn't want to teach in year 6. And we're talking about maths that 10 and 11-year-old children are doing. So I don't think it's that those teachers couldn't do the maths. I think it's just that they had this, or that other adults in school. But I think it was just that they had this anxiety, for want of a better word, anxiety about maths. And as Heidi said, it is not uncommon. It's going to affect a lot of people who work in schools and work with children, and it's something we all need to be aware of, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it's about how you're communicating those feelings. If you're an adult that's anxious about something, I think you could be a really good role model for children in expressing that anxiety in a particular way. But easier said than done, isn't it, to say that you're maybe a bit concerned about something?
Yeah, definitely. And as an adult, it's definitely harder, isn't it? So I guess then it's what do you do about it? That's the key thing, isn't it? If you're working with children, you're working with adults in school, what do we do about this situation? How do we help people who might be feeling anxious about maths?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think it's knowing who you're working with, having an open conversation, and then looking. And we're talking about maths, but I'm guessing this could relate to many other areas of the curriculum and life in general, really. And thinking about those best ways to tackle it head on and confidently. I guess thinking about the teachers not thinking they could do the maths. improving subject knowledge can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
Having access to things and practicing things can only be a good thing. But practicing something, if you don't think you're very good at it, is a bit of a struggle in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, I think perhaps just generally demystifying maths a little bit, and being aware of when we're talking about it that it's not particularly maybe with Key Stage 2 maths, because I'll be honest, as somebody who taught a lot in Key Stage 2, when a few years ago I needed to be involved in EYFS maths, I was a bit anxious about that. Not about the calculations. I was relatively happy with numbers to 10. But how do you teach young children those very early concepts? It's really, really tricky and yet so important. So, as you say, I think this can come through in lots of different ways. And I suppose as much as anything, it's having an awareness of it. And it's about making the most of the relationships that you've got. As primary educators, we're really lucky that we get to spend a lot of time with the pupils that we teach. We get to know them really well, and the adults that we work with as well. And so I know it's difficult in a class of 30 to think of them as 30 individuals, but you have got 30 individuals there, and we all know those children that when you've got a visitor in the room, you can call on that child because they're going to get the answer right. Equally, we know those children that are going to, hate you forever if you put them on the spot in front of everybody else. We can still work with those children, can't we? But just maybe be aware that perhaps using a maths question as a means of behaviour management isn't always the best way forward.
Absolutely. I think also just touching upon the relationships there, and I think relationships is the key here. That also extends to families, parents and carers as well. I think, trying to get parental involvement, talking about maths, doing maths workshops, because a parent's view of maths could be quite damaging to a child's view of maths.
Yeah.
In the same ways, it could be really empowering as well. So it's just working with everybody in the community, isn't it, to try to dispel those anxieties a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was great. If you have any questions or you'd like to put your own perspectives over about maths anxiety or anything else, we have an email address, would you believe? So you can email us at primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk, and we would love to hear from you. So each week on the Primary Maths Podcast, we are going to be sharing a wonderful resource carefully curated by Becky from Twinkle's library of thousands of maths resources. What have you picked out for us this week, Becky?
So this week is a little bit different in that it's an originals resource. So it's one of our original stories with a maths focus. It was written specifically to open up the conversation around maths anxiety.
I see what you've done there. That's very nice.
Seamless link there, John. So it's called Mastering the Mountain. It's aimed at Key Stage 2. It's a Key Stage 2 picture book. And it's about a young girl who's facing maths anxiety, and it's her journey really through mastering the metaphorical mountain of maths, through resilience and self-discovery, ably supported. There's a little bit of teacher in there that's helping her along the way. It's beautiful. The illustrations are beautiful. It's a really lovely read. So it just might help to start some conversations. Definitely worth a look.
Fantastic. I will have to check that out myself because I haven't seen that yet myself. So thank you for drawing that to my attention and everybody else's. So where can you find that, Becky? Whereabouts is that?
So you can find that on our website. If you search for Mastering the Mountain, you will be able to access the ebook, and it has some lovely accompanying resources as well.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Right, that's just about it for this week. If you've made it this far into the show, we are very grateful for you for sticking with us. We'll be back next week with some more Maths of Life and another podcast interview and some more resources. Thank you very much. See you next week, Becky.
See you next week, John. Thank you.